Hi, everyone. My name is Sunny, and I am the Policy and Advocacy Coordinator at Catalyst Miami, as well as a Naval Project Partner. I want to kindly thank everyone for participating and just welcome everyone to our fourth Enable Project Workshop series. We appreciate your participation, and we are excited to dive in.
So we're going to continue today. Today is the fourth of this 5-part training series. And the topic that we're going to have today is called the intersection of disability and abuse. This project is brought to you by the Ford Foundation, and it's called the Enable Project. The Enable Project is a coalition that brings together nonprofit and social justice organizations and their staff to create channels for integration of people with disabilities within their organizations and movements. This training is designed to guide organizations on how to integrate and include people with disabilities in ongoing civic engagement. Doing so can empower people with disabilities to take advantage of their rights and participate in social justice and political movements. As a society, we all benefit when everyone is able to participate and contribute. The partners in this grant are Catalyst Miami, the Center for Independent Living of South Florida, the Advocacy Network on Disabilities, and Disability Independence Group. And you will hear more from each of these organizations at the end of the training today. Today, there will be 3 speakers. Once again, my name is Debbie Dietz, and I am the founder and executive director of Disability Independence Group, or DIG. We are a disability rights advocacy center in Miami, Florida. Our mission is to expand opportunities for participation, education, employment, and acceptance of persons with disabilities through advocacy, litigation, education, and training. We have 2 guest speakers with us today. One is Catherine Magnoli, and Kat will be joining us towards the end of the presentation. And the other speaker is Anna Obregon. She works at an organization called MOHAN, and she's going to tell you more about herself and her organization in a few minutes. The work that DIG has been doing at the intersection of disability and abuse, we're doing through a project called the Miami Inclusion Alliance, or MIA for short. This project was started 5 years ago with a grant from the Department of Justice Office on Violence Against Women. And the Miami Inclusion Alliance is made up of 4 organizations: DIG, Dade Legal Aid, which is a civil legal service provider with a dedicated domestic violence unit; MOHAN, which is a certified sexual assault center that provides domestic violence and sexual assault education, direct response, and support services; and the Miami-Dade County Community Action and Human Services Department Coordinated Victim Assistance Center, or CVAC, which is a one-stop center that provides holistic and coordinated services to victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, dating violence, stalking, and human trafficking. What's so amazing about this grant is that they actually gave us time to talk and plan, which is something that you all know that you don't usually get when you get grant funding. And we were able and allowed to work together and really study what was going on in our community and work towards solutions that would allow for permanent change. So as part of that working together, we actually created a mission and a vision for this project. The mission of the Miami Inclusion Alliance, or MIA, is to learn about the intersection of disability and domestic violence and/or sexual assault in order to promote a culture of inclusion within and between all collaborating agencies. Collaboration will implement the necessary changes so that persons with disabilities who are affected by domestic violence and/or sexual assault have access to services. It's a grand mission, but we feel that with the time and the work that we've done, we are going to make this happen. And then our vision, the grand vision also, is that every agency that serves victim survivors is accessible, safe, and promotes dignity and respect.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Anna Obregon. I am with MOHAN. I am the Sexual Assault Program Director. At MOHAN, we provide a trusting environment that promotes emotional wellness and stability by empowering individuals through advocacy, direct response to domestic and sexual abuse, and other support services that strengthen families. MOHAN has been around for more than 25 years. We are a nonprofit agency, and we are the first agency to have a one-stop domestic violence and sexual assault center. Before I continue with the presentation, I would just like to share some information about a trigger warning. If you have experienced sexual violence, some of the information being covered in this presentation may be painful or difficult to hear. If you get triggered at any time during this presentation and need to take a break, please do so. And if you have the need to talk with someone confidentially, please know that you can reach someone at our helpline. That number is 305-763-2459. Switch. Here you see our information. We are located in South Dade area, which is approximately 30 miles from downtown Miami. Our address is 27112 South Dixie Highway, Naranja, Florida, 33032. Our main office number is 305-247-1388. You can also look us up on our website at mohanfla.org. Switch. We are now going to be showing you a presentation that covers different areas of dynamics of sexual violence. And here you will see how it devastates victims and families in different ways. Again, if you have a need to take a break, please do so at any time.
Like Roberto, Susan Rubio Rivera was also victimized by members of her own family. A third-generation Mexican-American, Susan's childhood was shattered from the very beginning.
I was 5 years old when my mother finally decided to leave my dad, who was very abusive. There isn't a whole lot of memories other than just bad stuff, because we were all witnesses of the domestic violence and the beatings that my mother suffered. What I can remember, it happened, I think, right after we started living with my grandpa. My grandpa also was a Mexican-American, Mexicano, very controlling, very domineering. All the family would be in this one little room, sitting room, watching TV, and he would be here in front of everybody. He would sit there, and then he would sit one of us on his lap, and then he would put a blanket over him, and he would start abusing us in front of everybody. I don't know if anybody knew what was going on. Now as an adult, I think back to those times and I say, how could you not know? How could you not know?
In trying to come to terms with these devastating experiences, victims undergo a range of emotions. Defining sexual abuse can often be the first step to understanding it.
Sexual abuse is not about sex. It is an act of aggression, and it has to do with power and control over another person. It is never the victim's fault.
This power and control begins with a process called grooming, in which the victim is manipulated by the abuser in order to achieve his or her goals.
Grooming is a gradual process that a perpetrator will develop with the victim. They will take the victim to special places, special activities, maybe be involved in their extracurricular activities or school. The perpetrator will give them special treats, buy them gifts, make them feel they're special, and build that emotional bond with the victim.
Basically, it would be a hug, a long touch. I didn't say anything. She knew when she did those little things to test boundaries, to test the relationship, that I didn't go talk to my parents. And it's not just with touching, it's special attention. It's getting to sit in the front seat all the time. It's extra dessert. It's 10 minutes more of TV, 20 minutes more of TV, which to you or I at this point doesn't seem like a big deal, but to a child it does, especially to a child who's starving for attention. She also worked on her grooming process with my parents. They could always trust her. They knew that they could. She stopped taking days off, so she was always there at the house, making sure that everything was okay.
As this grooming process evolves into abuse, the effects can manifest in a variety of ways depending on a person's nature.
Each person responds to the sexual abuse in their own way. However, there are three basic behaviors that we do categorize it into, and that is the sexualized behavior, the internalized behavior, and the externalized behavior. For externalized behavior, which we often find in boys, there you see more aggressive acting out, more maybe hurting themselves or hurting others, having difficulty with authority, getting into trouble with the law, possibly breaking things, becoming physically aggressive, just in general.
And by the 6th grade, I was convicted for my first felony on attempted murder charges. I had stabbed the young man because he had hit me. And I mean, while all this is going on, I was in a sexual pedophilic relationship with a 50-year-old man.
As a way to cope with the turmoil inside of him, Roberto began to act out.
I would have different masks. I would have different outfits I would wear. Through my adolescence, one of the outfits I wore was promiscuity. I became very promiscuous with young ladies. I had to have a lot of girlfriends to validate my masculinity, to make me feel like a man, to be rid of the feelings that somehow, am I homosexual, am I heterosexual? One of the other masks was aggression, hostility, anger, rage. If I'm the toughest, if I'm the baddest, you're not gonna touch me. You can't get close enough to me to be intimate with me to hurt me again.
The internalized behavior, which we often find more with girls, is where they may socially withdraw. If they're younger, they may regress back to baby talk, or maybe their toilet training is also goes back. And for older children who internalize it, they may have eating disorders, or they may also excel in their schoolwork and their extracurricular activities because they feel that this is a way to kind of run away from the problem.
Attention, it's getting, it does.
Hi, before I go into statistics, I just want to say that unresolved trauma is the fuel for the cycle of violence in our country. Unfortunately, there are a lot of children who are being abused throughout countries. This type of crime does not discriminate in any way. Anyone can experience sexual violence, including females, males, children, teens, adults, and even our elders. In Florida, it is estimated that 1 in 9 women are sexually assaulted at some point of their lives. 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys will be sexually abused before they turn the age of 18. 34% of people who sexually abuse a child are family members. Next. There are different types of sexual violence. There's child abuse, which is mainly incest. There's drug facilitated sexual assault, intimate partner sexual abuse, which includes marital and dating violence, acquaintance rape, statutory rape, sexual harassment, switch, sexual exploitation and trafficking, stranger rape. There's unwanted sexual gestures. There's coerced sexual violence. There's exposure to unwanted sexual contact. This includes porn. It's really important to understand that there's different languages that are known, and terms, I rather say, that are known in the community of service. Sexual violence is the inclusive term used to recognize that any type of violation towards you in a sexual way, gesture, or manner is something that we will work with, usually through community programs. When we are talking about legal terms, you will hear more of the words like sexual assault, sexual abuse. And these terms are very important, especially when trying to get justice through the legal system. We need to have the appropriate trained advocates to provide these supports because they know what is needed to be able to access the services that are needed throughout these different processes. Next. MOHAN has a sexual assault certified center. We are one of 2 centers in Miami-Dade County. MOHAN serves the southern portion of the county from Florida City up to Kendall Drive. Through our certified centers, we have certified advocates. What is a certified advocate? The conversation between a victim and an advocate is privileged. What does that mean for everybody? It means that what is said between us is confidential. Unless there are limitations to this privilege, unless the person says that they are going to be harming themselves, and or if they're minors, then we no longer have privilege. Advocates are able to provide support during any medical exam. We are also able to be in any type of interviews that are related to law enforcement or the state attorney's office. Here you see the Florida statute for sexual assault counselor victim privilege. Switch. Now I would like to talk about resources and services that are provided through our certified center. We have 24/7 advocacy, which includes on-scene response. So if someone contacts our helpline in the middle of the night, we can and we will go out to a hospital. We can respond on scene at the request of a law enforcement officer. We are also able to provide in-person or telephonic crisis intervention. We are able to provide other supports through the helpline, including information and referral and crisis intervention. We're able to coordinate services to make sure that the victim or survivor accesses whatever they need in whatever way that they need it. Our office services include therapy, more care coordination, which is an assessment of services, and community education. Switch. I would like to talk a little bit more about our in-person crisis intervention. This is a service that it's got to be explained in a way that is very understanding. We have many programs in our communities that provide case management. They provide different types of crisis intervention. The term that I'm using is associated with sexual assault. So in this process, what we tend to do is a comprehensive assessment of the person's emotional, psychological, and physical needs. And we also assess for any risks that they may have. Our programs are empowerment based, so anything, any service that happens, it will have to be with the approval and with the survivor making all the direction of where the services go and how they are being worked out or implemented. We provide accompaniment victims services through legal services, medical, and also to obtain other services through other facilities. We have individual and group therapy for children and adults. And we also have a special group which is led by survivors. That group is held on a weekly basis every Thursday from 6 to 8 p.m. It is a drop-in group, so people can sign up to get support through this group or just be part of a group of people who may understand what victim survivors go through, because it is something that is very complex, and sometimes having that extra support can really help people manage different difficult situations. Included in our services, we also have safety planning, which we will be covering a little further down in the presentation. We also, within our service agency, have two co-located programs. We have Legal Aid Society, which provides civil, legal, and family services. And we also have VIDA Assistance Link, and they provide immigration services to undocumented victim survivors. Switch. In addition to the victim services that I just covered, we also try to provide supportive services to help the person become self-sufficient. So if someone has to leave an unsafe place, we try to put the person in shelter. If there's no shelter space available, we do try to put them up in a hotel or accommodate in any other way that we can. Part of our emergency assistance is also helping victims file for sexual assault victims' compensation. I want to make something clear about this service. There's only 2 agencies in the county who can file these certifications for this service through the state of Florida, which is the two certified centers, MOHAN and RTC, the Rape Treatment Center that is located in downtown Miami. We also do presentations on domestic violence, sexual assault, and HIV. We go out into the community and we conduct outreach and we do different awareness activities. And we're always trying to find ways to engage the community. We are here to serve the community. The programs are not about the staff, it's about the people who we serve. Next. Again, here we have our sexual assault helpline, which is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And the number is 305-763-2459. I want to say something about the service that I'm telling you about right now. The reason why it's important to have this support service 24 hours a day is because most of the people who go into crisis will go into crisis after hours. When they settle down after the day of doing different things, you have more time to think about things that you have gone through in your life, or you have times to get in touch with your feelings. And this is where things may get overwhelming and you may need that additional support. I do want to explain how this service works. When people contact our line, you do not have to give any type of identifying information if you don't want to, until you feel comfortable. And if you don't feel comfortable, you do not have to give your name. You do not have to talk about the actual incident of abuse. You can talk about what you're going through in the moment. For example, we have people who contact us and tell us that they're not able to sleep. What we try to do in this instance is focus on how we can get you to focus on something different that's going to help you decrease your stress or whatever is causing the overwhelming feelings. So we have different techniques. For example, sometimes we will do breathing techniques with different people, and that will help them feel a little better. Or we also help people identify their own coping skills. That sometimes becomes a little hard to identify when we're feeling overwhelmed. Again, we are here to help anybody who needs it. Our services are about you. And if there is anyone, you or anyone that you know that needs our services, I want you to know that you are not alone. We are here to help you in any way that we can. Thank you so much. And now Debbie will continue with the disability and abuse.
Thank you, Anna. That was amazing information that you gave. Okay, Javi, do you have any questions that came in?
We just got one. The question is, does MOHAN provide services in Haitian Creole?
We do not currently provide it in that language, but we do work with partners in the community who can help us translate. And if we have to, we will also get trained advocates through other agencies to come in and provide that support. One other thing before I continue, and sorry that I forgot to mention something that is very important. All of our services are free to all of our community.
Javier, any other questions, or we'll continue?
You can continue. There's nothing else right now.
Excellent. Okay, so what Anna started talking about was focusing on sexual violence. Now I'm going to explain the definition of domestic violence, also called DV, and then we'll continue on how this intersects with persons with disabilities. So domestic violence is the willful intimidation, physical assault, battery, sexual assault, and or other abusive behavior as part of a systemic pattern of power and control perpetrated by one intimate partner against another. And you heard in our video that was played earlier, you saw the words power and control. And we're going to keep coming back to those terms throughout the rest of the presentation. This is going to include physical violence, sexual violence, psychological violence, and emotional abuse. The frequency and severity of domestic violence can vary dramatically. However, the one constant component of domestic violence is one partner's consistent efforts to maintain power and control over the other. Abuse may begin with behaviors that may easily be dismissed or downplayed, such as name-calling, threats, possessiveness, or distrust. Abusers may apologize profusely for their actions or try to convince the person they are abusing that they do these things out of love or care. However, violence and control always intensifies over time with an abuser despite the apologies. What may start out as something that was first believed to be harmless, like wanting to spend time with the victim and only them because they love them, can escalate into extreme control and abuse. Here are some warning signs of an abusive relationship. Someone that has quick attachment and expression and says, "I love you, marry me," after 1 week of dating. A frightening temper where they recklessly blow up, or they have reckless driving, rough physical treatment, the mean and sweet cycle, places blame on the other person, breakup panic. If you break up with me, I'm going to kill myself, so that the abused person feels like they cannot leave the relationship, unwanted sexual contact, emotional abuse, which could include harassment, ridicule, and things that break down someone's self-confidence. And they could have economic control or exploitation of someone's finances. Now, when Anna started her presentation, she's talked about the statistics in our community. Now we're going to look at what happens with abuse and a person with a disability. So I'm going to read these statistics to you. 92% of women with a disability ranked violence and abuse as their top priority of topics that affect or impact their lives. And women with disabilities are at least 2 times more likely to experience abuse. And this next statistic is just staggering. 97 to 99% of abusers are known and trusted by the victim or survivor with an intellectual or developmental disability. Yet even with these staggering statistics, we're not seeing lots of people with disabilities accessing the safety net that we've created in our community. Remember back to our training Disability 101, and we looked at the statistics of persons with disabilities in the United States, in Florida, in Miami-Dade County, and then in the city of Miami. In the city of Miami, we were just under 30%. In Miami-Dade County, around 25%. Think about the number of people in our community, and think about the number of people with disabilities that have are at risk for abuse or are being abused. And we are not seeing that number of victims or survivors in our system. So what our grant has been about is how do we take these amazing domestic violence sexual assault programs, like you just heard from MOHAN, that we have in our community, and link them to persons with disabilities, which we know based on statistics are at this high rate and risk of abuse. And that's what our grant's been looking at. That's what we're here to talk to you about today. How do we share and bridge these gaps so that people that are being abused in our community know how to get help and know the services that are available for them to get help? Now, research, as we're showing you, indicates that people with disabilities face significant increased risk of abuse by people they know. Recognizing this fact will help us as a system to address the abuse. Now, as I had just told you before, 97 to 99% of victims with developmental or intellectual disabilities know their abusers. Of those numbers, 32% were abused by family members or acquaintances, and 44% had a relationship with the victim specifically related to the victim's disability, such as a residential care staff member, a provider of transportation, or personal care assistant or provider. This increased risk applies to both males and females, and it crosses all racial and ethnic groups. Survivors with disabilities often also experience multiple victimizations, and the abuse lasts longer than survivors without disabilities. So imagine this is happening, and these are the risks that we in the community need to look out for and be aware of. Understanding some of the factors that contribute to these high numbers will give us some indication and some ways that we can help to reduce them. There are a number of factors that contribute to these high risks from a historically marginalized group of people. Now, we talked about that when we looked at Disability 101 and the intersection of disability and civic engagement. We look at people with disabilities with negative attitudes and negative stereotypes. And one of these stereotypes is lack of credibility. Throughout history, people with disabilities have sometimes been viewed through the lens of disability, not ability, which is what we talked about in the last training. And this has led to the presumption that they're not credible, that what they say doesn't matter. People with intellectual disabilities, mental health issues, traumatic brain injuries are often looked at skeptically when they report abuse. Another thing that we know is that people with disabilities are often isolated, both in the classroom, in work environments, and in housing where they live. This social segregation between people with and without disabilities leads to invisibility. And we all know that violence thrives behind closed doors. So as persons with disabilities are isolated and segregated, there's no one around for them to reach out to get help, right? They have nobody to turn to. And because of this isolation, they have an increased exposure to potential abusers, which we saw before. A huge percentage are people they know that are their abusers. Another
Debbie?
thing, yeah.
We do have a question.
Sure.
One of them is, do all signs need to be there from the list that you provided for it to be an abusive relationship?
No, it doesn't need every one of them for that to be an abusive relationship. There are many relationships that someone isn't hit, but is psychologically or emotionally abused, and that still is the abuse. So no, you don't need all of them. Anything else, Javi?
That's it for now. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll continue. So We were just talking about this increased exposure to potential abusers. There's also a culture of compliance for persons with disabilities. They want to please people, they want to be accepted, so they're going to go on with what someone says to them or what they want to do because they want to be accepted. And they're also seen as easy targets so that abusers take advantage of them. All right, let's move on. Here are some examples of tactics that an abuser might use. And we're going to look at 5 different categories of tactics that an abuser might use. If you look at physical, this can include withholding personal care if the person has a disability. It might include not letting someone have their medication or even using restraints so someone can't leave. Sexual can include taking advantage of the lack of understanding about sex and what might be appropriate in a healthy sexual relationship. In our state, we don't get a lot of sexual education in our school system, but for students with disabilities, there's basically no sexual education for those students. And there's a stereotype that people believe that people with disabilities are asexual, so they don't give them education on healthy sexual activity. So sometimes when a person with a disability is being abused, they don't even know what is appropriate or inappropriate to know that they're being abused. And this happens all the time, and it's something that is very important that we talk about and acknowledge and understand. Also, isolation, which we talked about just a minute ago, controlling access to someone's communication device, their service animal, their wheelchair, or their walker, the way that they can get around, will isolate them and not allow that person to ask for help or tell anybody they're being abused. Also, emotional. This could include killing or threatening someone's service animal or ridiculing a person about their disability. And then economic could include coercing a victim to sign over rights to financial resources, such as their SSDI check or money or income that they get. It could include canceling someone's health insurance or exploiting a power of attorney or other legal document so that they don't have income or a way to be self-sufficient so that they can leave the abuser. Victims with disabilities also have unique challenges in addressing and healing from abuse. And it's important that we look at some of these challenges. They may have an increased difficulty in understanding what happened to them, like I was just explaining about what is appropriate or healthy sexuality versus what is inappropriate or shouldn't be happening to them. They also may have restricted the ability to communicate what happened to them, whether they need an American Sign Language interpreter or some other type of interpreter to communicate, or because of an intellectual or developmental disability, they might not be able to use words to communicate what's happening to them. And if they need assistance from a caregiver, that has to be factored into any therapeutic approach. And that's one of the reasons also that victims with disabilities don't leave, because if they're dependent on a caregiver or someone to help them even get out of bed or go to the bathroom or do personal care, it's very hard to leave that and not know how you're going to get your basic needs met if you have to leave in a hurry and go to a shelter. And it can be a reason that someone stays in a situation that's not good for them. Great. I'm going to jump out of order with my slides a little bit and show a video that I just think is powerful and talks about how people internalize emotion. And I think it's a good place in the presentation to do this. So if you indulge me, I'm going to flip through the slides a little bit and go ahead. I don't know if anyone's seen this video before. It's really just sound playing, not really words, but I think the visual of it is very important, and I want to play it and share it with you guys, and then we'll go back to power and control. Sorry, let me try to get back into the presentation now. I show this for a couple different reasons. It's not that the video is specifically about domestic violence or sexual assault, but I think it shows something that as we live in a world where we might be around people and they share information with us, other people might absorb their pain or their energy or their emotion, and then what do you do with all that? And I love how this video uses animals to show how the animals relieve the pain or the trauma or the emotion. And I brought the video for two reasons. One, to show the power of animals, and two, because later in the presentation, if we have time, we're going to talk about how animals can be used in a domestic violence or abuse situation, and just how important animals can be to people. And it's an area that DIG spends a lot of time on, human-animal interaction and the power of animals as a tool with people's emotional well-being. So that being said, if there are no questions about the video, I'm going to go back to where we were, which is power and control.
Hi, Debbie. We got a question. So the question goes, do you believe that culture plays a role in a family's willingness to report an assault? Many cultures believe that what happens at home stays at home. Does MOHAN provide support to the families during these tough times?
Javi, I'm going to let Anna answer that question. Anna, can you go off mute and answer the question?
I do want to say that there are many, many factors that influence the way that victims, survivors think about sexual assault, factors that abusers take into account and why they think that they abuse. And it is very, very complex. I will say that a lot of behaviors are learned. For example, in domestic violence, we see it a lot where culture teaches little boys to act aggressive. They have to show off their manhood. They have to be, they have to show a physical strength in order to be considered a strong male in society. And whereas girls are supposed to be delicate, we're supposed to be people who are always looking for someone to help us. And sometimes these different cultures or beliefs and even religion sometimes play a role, and they put us at risk. And we don't realize it because it is something that has been ingrained intergenerationally within our society or the culture within my family. So when we talk about abuse, specifically with domestic and sexual violence, I will say that when we do our assessment, there's a lot of stuff that we have to take into consideration to make sure that we, number one, don't offend anyone, because they may have a certain belief and it may not be a belief that is one that we agree with. Two, we got to understand that people, no matter what they go through in life, they may encounter various types of abuse, which has in itself so many implications. The area of domestic and sexual violence is very complex. So to get back to the question, when we serve someone at MOHAN, we try to serve the entire family. When somebody comes into our agency, for example, for domestic violence services, we don't necessarily need the person to have a report, or they don't have to be living outside of the home. They can still be living with the abuser, and they can come to MOHAN and get therapy services. And the person will then decide if they want to continue in the same unhealthy relationship or if they are determined to do something about it. We are not here to judge anyone. We are not here to tell people what to do. We do believe at MOHAN that everyone is an expert in their own lives. Sometimes we just need to be reminded about our strengths. By the time a person comes to our office, and I'm referring to domestic violence survivors, they have already been surviving through their relationships. So they do have a safety plan, for example, already in place. They do have excellent coping skills, but sometimes we get emotionally overwhelmed, and sometimes we cannot see what our qualities or our capabilities are because we have the abuser just beat down on those things. And we'll talk a little bit about those things through the power and control wheel. So when we consider all of these things, when we consider the victim and also the abuser, because as I mentioned earlier, some of these behaviors are learned. So when we have a boy, for example, who is brought up in a machista community, and that is a community where they do in one way, and it's not always promoted verbally, but they do promote this controlling and empowering male role that many times males don't know any different. They don't know that there's a different way to manage their anger, to manage the situation that they're in. And another thing that we have to take into consideration is that many of our males are also abused. Again, as I mentioned earlier in the slides, anyone can be a victim. And we see that most of the victims who have gone through childhood sexual abuse or who have been victims of child abuse have this unresolved trauma. So they grow up having this complex issue that is just manifesting in them in many negative ways. So if we have someone come to our office who is an abuser, we don't necessarily serve perpetrators, but if we do have someone who comes in and says, you know what, I've done some things in my life, I'm not proud of doing it, I do want to change, we will even be willing to help someone like that. So our doors are primarily open to everyone. when we are working with couples, we will only serve the victim, survivor. I hope this answered your question.
That's great. Javi, are there other questions or can we go on?
You may continue. And yes, it did answer her question, so thank you.
Excellent. So I'm going to kind of explain the background and how a power and control wheel was created, and then I'm going to let Anna take over again. So we're going to kind of flip-flop back and forth for the next section of the presentation. So you've heard us use the words power and control in my definitions, in Anna's words, in the video that we showed you, and where these words came from and this terminology came from was, it started back in 1984. There was a domestic violence program that was developing a curriculum for domestic violence. And what they did is they did a focus group of women that had been victim survivors of domestic violence and documented the most common abusive behaviors and tactics that were used against the women. And from this information, they created this prototype for a power and control wheel. And the wheel makes a pattern of intent and impact of violence visible so that you can not just hear it, but see it written down and how it all relates back to other things. The tactics chosen for the wheel were those that were most universally experienced by battered women. And the power and control wheel represents the lived experience of women who lived with a man who beat them. It doesn't attempt or it doesn't give you a broad understanding of every instance of violence or all violence that might occur in a home or community, but instead it offers a precise explanation of the tactics that men use to batter women. And when the wheel was created back in 1984, they focused on a woman's experience because at that time, 86 to 97% of all the criminal assaults were men on women, and 3.5 times more killings were of men killing women than the other. And so we know now as we've evolved as a community and a society that it's not just men violence against women, but that expanded. But I wanted to give you the background of how this process started. We're going to show you this wheel and Anna's going to talk. And then if we have time, I have two different wheels to show you over time how this concept that was started back in 1984 has evolved to include more areas of violence. So Anna, I'm going to switch and let you take over and talk about the wheel.
Well, one thing about the wheel that I want to say is this wheel, as Debbie mentioned, it does cover 8 different tactics that are used. These tactics start from using intimidation. This is something that hopefully we'll be able to share this wheel with you so you can go ahead and read through the different actions within each area or tactic. But one thing I want to cover about the wheel is that you're going to see that there are some tactics that are not necessarily forceful. There's going to be tactics that are used where the abuser is using some form of manipulation. And you're going to see that even one of the tactics within this is going to be using coercion for physical and even sexual violence. So let me go around the wheel now. We have using intimidation. By just having previous incidents of abuse, an abuser can make their victim do whatever they want just by giving her the look. She knows that that was the same look that led to some type of physical altercation or other type of domestic violence. Using emotional abuse. This is where the abuser will tend to make the victim feel less than him. So he will continuously try to beat her down by calling her different names that are degrading to her. He will look out and he will listen. And I'm referring, and sorry, I should have explained this from the beginning. I'm going to be referring to gender roles in this area of the presentation because we know that more women than men do experience domestic violence. But again, I want to repeat, males can also be victims of domestic violence. So he can get his victim to feel like she's less than him. And what that does to the victim is it creates a stage for her to doubt herself, to begin feeling guilty for things that are not necessarily her fault. And also, this also creates a situation where her self-esteem is being attacked. Another tactic that is used is the isolation. It's keeping her away from her loved ones, from friends, from family. This can be started off when it's in the dating stage, and sometimes this isn't picked up so easily because of the manipulation, again, that the person will use. For example, when a male tells a female that he is jealous of her, or that he acted out about a certain situation because he was jealous. And sometimes the victim will feel that this jealousy justifies his action. So what does that do? That minimizes the warning signs for her. And you will see that this will increase throughout a domestic violence relationship. Another tactic is minimizing, denying, and blaming, making light of the abuse and not taking her concerns about it seriously. For example, he can shift the responsibility of the situation on her. For example, he could say, "It's your fault. I was stressed out from work. You should have known I have a lot of pressure, and you're now giving me more things to worry about. And I acted out in a violent way because of what you did." In other tactic, using children, this is where he can make her feel guilty about the children. He can use the children to actually relay messages to the victim in a negative way. He can also threaten to take the children. A lot of times, this will keep the victim paralyzed in a domestic violence situation because they feel like they're thinking about the children. But one thing we do know, that when children stay within a family where there is domestic violence, the children will suffer. So while the victim, in many cases, mom, is trying to protect her children and not taking them away from their father because we don't want the children to grow up without a father, at the same rate, she doesn't understand that they are also being hurt by what they're hearing and what they're seeing. And for those of you that don't know, there is actually a law that protects children. It is the law that's called Witness of Domestic Violence. And this is when a police officer goes out to a scene where there has been domestic violence. If he identifies that there's children in the home, he or she may contact the Department of Children and Families to do a further report. And this is just for the protection of the children. This is one of those situations where it becomes difficult a lot of times for the person who is accessing services to understand. Because they say, why are you calling the Department of Children and Families on me? You know that they can take my children away. What used to happen back in the 90s and the early 2000s was a lot of children were being removed from the home. After many programs came together, advocate programs came together, we decided to educate the system, the children's system, to let them know that we are re-victimizing these people who are already going through a difficult situation. So now what the Department of Children and Family tends to do is work with mom instead of putting the burden on them for the violence. And they will try to do everything to help the person move themselves and their children into a safer place. And that includes providing some things that will help them become self-sufficient. Another tactic that a person may use, and in this case, the male, it's going to be their male privilege, treating her like a servant, making all decisions, being the one to define the men's and the woman's role in the relationship. Many times he can use this also against the children. For example, when he wants to make her look bad in front of the children, he can blame her for why or why not the children are able to do something that they want to do. Another tactic is using economic abuse. And this is where he prevents her from getting or keeping a job. If she decides to get her own independence, she may choose to move on. And that's something that he just cannot allow her to do. Making her ask for money, giving her an allowance, taking her money when she does work, or not letting her know about or have access to other family income. Another tactic is using the coercion and threats, making or carrying out these threats to do something or to hurt. And again, it comes in different ways. He will learn the different vulnerabilities that she has, and he will use them against her. For example, if he knows that she loves him because she is repeatedly showing him or telling him, he will threaten to hurt himself, so she will not leave the relationship. He will also threaten to report her. Let's say if she's an undocumented person in the US, he will say that he will deport her and that they will take her children away. And these things really do impact the person. It instills a fear that, again, sometimes makes the person feel paralyzed. What do all these 8 tactics do, they help the abuser get to the middle of the center where you see the power and control, which is the abuser's ultimate goal. By using all of these things, he is able to make sure that when he is present or not, he can continue to control his victim.
Okay, Anna, that was an amazing explanation of the power and control wheel. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm not going to go through each of the spokes of this, but as I said, since this original wheel was made, it has been evolved for different situations. So they actually have created a power and control wheel for people that are deaf. And if we have time at the end, I can go back and tell you what each of the pie pieces mean, but it's the same concept, but then they've now given the examples and specified specifically for a person that is deaf how the power and control is done. Another one is also, there's a power and control wheel of animal abuse and domestic violence, and how an abuser might use animals in conjunction with or as part of the domestic violence cycle. And once again, if there's time at the end, we will come back to these 2 power wheels and actually go through and explain some of the examples. The next part we're going to go to, and once again, I'm going to introduce the topic and tell you some about it. Then I'm going to let Anna talk about it, and then I'm going to come back and give you specific tips and how it impacts a person with a disability when you talk about safety planning. So a safety plan is a personalized, practical plan that includes ways to remain safe while in a relationship when you're planning to leave a relationship or after you leave an abuser. Each of these plans are individualized for the person and the situation that they're in. Anna, do you want to talk about how MOHAN works with and deals with safety planning?
Yes, thank you for that. I want to say that safety planning, first of all, is an evolving plan. So the plan is not just one that you do one time. We got to understand that situations may change for the individual. So we may be having to update that plan at different times. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. But I want to start off by saying something about safety planning. It has to be individualized and it has to be empowerment based. What do I mean by that? We have to understand, and we really got to get this through everything in our being when we are doing advocacy help, or when we're trying to help someone who we see is in a violent situation. We want to get them out. We want to provide all these resources. We want to tell them, go to a shelter, for example, or go to a hotel. Let's get you out because something worse is going to happen. Well, we need to understand that the person is the expert in their own lives. And we got to always keep in mind that that person has already been surviving their situation. So if anybody knows what is best for them, is them. What our role should always be is provide guidance and try to identify situations or things that put the victim at risk that they may not be identifying. In order for us to do this, we have to come from an understanding and the mentality that we got to start by believing that the person has the power and the ability to be able to do what they need to be safer. First of all, if they are coming to you for help, or if they're even just disclosing information, that in itself is something that takes a lot of courage to do. Talking about these sensitive issues is very, very hard. And a lot of times, people don't realize how much strength they have until they need to do what they have to do to get out of a situation. When we are doing our safety plans, what we're doing is looking out again for those things that the person may not think of. We know how to identify through different assessments what the person may need, so they can become self-sufficient and so they can make their transition a smoother one. For example, when safety planning, we should always consider who is part of the safety plan. Is the individual alone, or do they have children? Where do the children go to school? Does the individual have a job? How will this safety plan implicate her job? Does she own a home with the abuser? How is the safety plan going to implicate that situation? One thing I do want everyone to know, and to if you don't get anything else from the safety plan, is one thing that abusers do not like to feel or know is that they're losing control. So this is a statistic that is very important for you to know. When a person leaves a domestic violence situation, the risk for their for lethality goes up by 50%, because this begins to create something in the abuser where he starts losing control and he starts to do things that may become more aggressive in his behavior. We have to be very, very careful when we're doing the safety plan. There's things that we do have to consider. And there are different indications of things going into a stage where there may be lethality. For example, does the abuser own a gun? Has he ever threatened the victim with the gun? Has he ever threatened to hurt others? Has he ever tried to do anything in front of others? Those things will give us an indication of whether or not the abuser's behavior can become so aggressive where it can also lead to lethality. And we have to consider what the person's feeling is about moving from one stage to the other. And what do I mean from that? A person may be ready to come in and ask for help. That may be the first stage of them feeling that they have some type of courage or strength to do what they need to become safer. You may see that the person comes in, you're giving them all the resources, but then they don't come back and follow up with other services. We have to understand that there may have been other situations that came up. So we have to always remind the person that we are here for them in any way that they need it and when they need it. And when they come back, it's always good to have a conversation about what has been happening, have a better understanding of how we can continue the different people. At MOHAN, we have 3 plans that we use a plan for the person to stay in the situation with the abuser. Again, I want to remind everyone, at MOHAN, we do not tell people what to do. We are there. What I was saying, the second safety plan that we do, and this is just a guide that we use, we look at when a person is thinking about leaving their situation. And the third one is when the person has already left. What these 3 different guidance tools provide us is questions on what to look for, things to bring up that can help us create a comprehensive safety plan for the victim. For example, if a victim is leaving the situation with children, well, we know there's going to be some items that she will be needing for herself and her children. It can include, for example, the children's report cards. It can include their social security cards, their birth certificates. It could include any medications that the children may be taking. It could include anything that the person that they will need in the near future to be able to access other services or to become self-sufficient. And sometimes people who are living in these situations, they don't consider these things. So it's really, really important that when we do refer people to programs for safety planning, that we make sure that they do know how to do these comprehensive services.
Thank you, Anna, so much for that explanation. I'm now gonna link it to how it's a little different for a person with a disability or some other things to keep in mind. And then we're almost getting to the end of the presentation. So as we've told you already, or I've told you already, persons with disabilities, they stay longer in the abusive situations and they have fewer options for wanting to leave. So everything that Anna said to you about safety planning is the same for a person with a disability, but there might be even more barriers put in their way before they are actually able to leave. Another barrier that might come up for them is that they might have had negative encounters with other agencies in the past and therefore be afraid to leave the security that they have, even if it is abusive, to an unknown that they're not sure of. And then another thing that's unique for persons with a disability is that they fear losing their autonomy and they fear becoming institutionalized, which means being put back into an institution to live where they lose their freedom and their ability to make their own decisions and choose what happens to them. And you remember in one of the other trainings, we talked about institutionalization and what a big deal that was in the disability community and what a big leap forward once that institutionalization was stopped and people could live in the community again. So that is always a fear for a person with a disability. They don't want to lose their autonomy or their ability to live in the community the way they want. And it's this constant give and take with the safety planning that's very important. Another thing when you add when looking with a person with a disability, there's going to be unique physical barriers. communication barriers, programmatic barriers, and attitudinal barriers, which we've talked about in terms of the other trainings. And then you just got to remember to apply them when someone is creating a safety plan for a person with a disability. And
I got a question whenever you get a
Yeah,
chance. Sorry
go ahead.
to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
Okay, so one question is, thanks for bringing up the stats. It really raises my awareness level big time. Are there any stats on abuse or domestic violence within undocumented people versus documented people? How do we empower undocumented people to utilize MOHAN services?
Anna, if your internet's working and we can hear you, do you want to try to answer? That's a complicated question.
Yes, it is. And it's a great question, actually. And just like with persons with disabilities, the immigrant population has these additional barriers that the abuser also uses against them. I think the basic thing to tell anyone is that we are not affiliated in any way with any governmental agency. We are not affiliated with immigration. We will not report their abuse if they don't want to. And if the person feels comfortable before accessing our services, they can come in or they can contact our office and just get more familiarized with our services and find out if it is a service that they would be willing to access.
So I think just to summarize safety planning, and this applies to persons with disabilities or without, you've got to create a strategy. You've got to think through all the possible barriers, including if the person has a disability. You've got to identify accessible options for safety. Make sure the person can get into the shelter if that's where they're going and it's accessible. And also have a plan for how someone can call 911. Because if someone's deaf, it might not be that easy. Or if someone has a disability and doesn't have access to their phone without asking their personal care attendant how to reach their phone, that's something to think about that's unique for a person with a disability. Now, poor Kat has been waiting patiently to speak all this time, and I want to make sure that she has time to speak. So Kat, if you can unmute yourself, I'm going to let you introduce yourself and talk about the MIA Liaison Project.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me on the call. This was a fascinating workshop, and I'm so glad to be here. Okay, so a little bit about me. I am a disability advocate that focuses on acceptance and inclusion. I do this in a variety of ways, writing for both children and adults, and I'm a public speaker. I also have written short stories that were published in different authorizations of Be Kinder and Chicken Soup for the Soul Think Possible. I have graduated with an AA in exceptional student education, and I have certificates from University of Miami Mailman Center in both their self-advocacy leadership training and emerging transformational leadership program. In 2017, I was awarded Miss Wheelchair Florida, where I worked with mayors to create system change by getting accessible beach mats in several locations in South Florida. I also worked with the Advisory Board for Exceptional Student Education of Miami-Dade County Public School District on activities for their Disability Awareness Month and Inclusion Week. I am so grateful that my advocacy has now transitioned into the Miami Inclusion Alliance Liaison Project, which is a group of 4 people with disabilities that want to learn about the intersection of disability and domestic violence, sexual assault, and then get involved in the domestic violence sexual assault community. The liaisons are participating in committees in the domestic violence sexual assault system of care. The collaboration partners serve as mentors to the liaisons and facilitate their participation at system meetings. The goal is to have persons with disabilities participating on the already existing committees. This does not exist now in our community. We believe this will transform the culture and model nothing about us without us. And I was asked to answer one question, which oddly enough, I had an experience a couple of days ago, which goes perfectly with the question. The question is, how would I like to be treated when I enter an office? And if I have time, I just want to tell you a quick story of, I went to get a sonogram for a medical condition that I have. And the tech was extremely rude to me. He kept asking me very degrading questions of, oh, so do you have a job? And do you drive? And he actually asked me if my mother knew in advance about my disability. And when I answered no, he became very silent, making it clear that he had thought that, oh, well, if she knew, she would have aborted you. And I took such offense to this, and I told him flat out that no matter whether or not my mom knew in advance, that she would have, continued on with the pregnancy. And this is just one example of how people with disabilities are treated when they go into a medical facility, or even when they go to talk to anybody of authority, they can be talked to in a very demeaning and degrading way. And personally, even though I'm small in stature, I'm sure you guys can tell I have a big personality, and I like to be talked to as a very competent and educated adult. So that is my little participation in today, and I hope I was able to help with anything. And if anyone has questions, please let me know.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kat. And stay tuned, because Kat's going to be doing more and more trainings throughout our community at this intersection. And we're so excited to have her part of our project and learning and advocating as we go along. And your story was perfect, exactly what we're talking about, and fits in with what we're doing. I'm going to skip because we gave you a lot of information today, and I want to tell you that we have tools that we've made for you that we want to share. We created a YouTube channel for the MIA project. And these are tools that you can use use them, show them, play them, make trainings with them. We made a video on domestic violence 101. Sexual assault 101, the legal system 101, how do you get help? What is a protection order? How do you get one in Miami-Dade County? We did a video on disability 101, and then a 5th video on the intersection, combining all of this together. We're in the process now of making a new video series called Your Lived Experience. And what Kat talked about is an example of what it's going to be like. We're taking people with disabilities and asking them, what do you like to see happen when you ask for help? What are your worst experiences? What are tips you can give organizations when they want to work with people with disabilities? And we're going to do different videos on different disabilities. And the first one that's here, number 1, is about physical disabilities, and some of the tips and suggestions that'll help you if you're ever working with a person with a physical disability. And stay tuned for more videos that we're making. But the idea is that we don't want to just give you information. We want to help you learn the right way to do it. We want you to take what we've gotten the privilege of this grant to be able to do and share it with you. It's not just for us, but we want to share what we're learning with everyone so that everyone can embed this information into your project, into your organization, into whatever you're working on. Our next and final presentation is going to be August 26th, and we're going to talk about how to host an accessible event. And just bring everything together that you've learned about over the summer in this 5-part training series. I wanted you to know, and Camilo asked me to share, that all of the PowerPoint slides have been made into accessible formats and are available on DIG's website. And here are the links. And you go to our website, click the purple box that says resources, and then click the webinar that you're interested in, and you can get the information that we've been sharing for each presentation.